Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to take you to Richmond, Virginia on November 3rd, 1865. The war in the East has been over for some time, as has the war in the West. Hostilities are over, and Union soldiers are mustering out of the army to go back home. On that evening of November 3rd, the veteran volunteers of the 5th Ohio Cavalry arrived in the former Confederate capital. They were on their way from Danville, Virginia to Ohio to be mustered out after 4 years of arduous service. Their list of engagements was long: the Battle of Shiloh, the Siege of Corinth, the Vicksburg Campaign and Siege, Chattanooga, the Siege of Knoxville, the Atlanta Campaign, Sherman's March to the Sea, the Carolinas Campaign, and the North Carolina battles of Averysboro and Bentonville. For much of their service, they served in Major General Hugh Judson Kilpatrick, better known by you students of the Civil War as Cavalry Kilpatrick, and his division of the Cavalry Corps in the Army of the Tennessee. Buckeye troopers of the 5th, they didn't stay long in Richmond, but it was a memorable stay. I found 2 surviving newspaper accounts that describe their time in Richmond very differently. In one story, they're whiskey drinking rabble rousers throwing bottles and bent on mayhem. In another, they're law abiding, saintly teetotalers taking care as they move through town. I couldn't find an image to really represent both sides of the story, so I found this great painting by Edwin Forbes, the wonderful Civil War era illustrator who did such wonderful works for magazines, for prints, and of course, the oil painting that you see here. Let me read these accounts to you so you can get a sense for just how different these accounts are. So first, let's go to that first account, and the headline says it all: an obstreperous Ohio regiment in Richmond, the regulars called out. About 11 o'clock on Friday night, the 5th Ohio Cavalry reached the city under its regimental officers from Danville, where it had been doing duty, and were assigned quarters at the Libby, formerly the prison. Early on Saturday morning, a large number of them, the Buckeye troopers, left their temporary barracks and imbibed insufficiently of common whiskey to render them noisy and insubordinate. Hearing how they were proceeding, Lieutenant Murray of the 20th New York State Militia, the officer of the guard, hastened to the prison to quell the disturbance. He was immediately surrounded by 12 or 13 of the most intoxicated, who threatened to shoot him if he attempted to make any arrests. At this juncture, bottles, empty of course, were thrown from the windows of the quarters of the regiment. Lieutenant Murray sent for a force when 20 of the 4th Massachusetts came to his assistance, but these were quickly driven back. The cavalry continued to swear during the affair that they were armed with 7 shooters and could whip every infantryman who attempted to interfere with them. Soon after the repulse of the Castle Thunder Guard, Captain Ellsworth, with 36 of the 11th United States Regulars, reached the spot and restored order without much trouble. 368 of the regiment were thereupon marched down to Rockets and placed upon a transport to prevent a repetition of the disorder. 3 companies which had not participated in it were permitted to remain at their headquarters in the Libby. A sergeant, a ringleader, arrested by Lieutenant Murray, snapped a pistol at him. The fact that the cap was defective gives the guard force 1 more officer for duty this morning than there would have been had it exploded. The sergeant was then secured and locked up in the castle. Captain Shoemaker made several narrow escapes as one of the soldiers attempted to shoot him, while another drew a saber. Both were fortunately, however, prevented from carrying out their murderous purpose. Considering the excitement which prevailed, it was a remarkable circumstance that no one was very seriously hurt during an affair which promised for a time to culminate in bloodshed. The regiment is en route to Ohio, where it will be mustered out. So there is the first account, the not so good guys of the 5th Ohio. Here's another version, and this one comes from quotes, I should say, the lieutenant colonel commanding the 5th, John Pummel. So here's the story. It says, the 5th Ohio Cavalry, the lieutenant colonel commanding the 5th Ohio Cavalry, John Pummel, has published a card in the State Journal in reply to a story in the Richmond papers about the Ohio boys. He says the Richmond police were a pack of robbers who seized and robbed sober and unoffending men on a pretense of keeping order. According to the colonel's account, the men were most shamefully abused in Richmond. He says, men of my command who were duly sober, men who were never known to be drunk or disorderly, were, while passing along the streets or while stopping at places where refreshments could be obtained, pounced upon by the police and taken to the station house. And there the police were ordered, in the language of one of the officers in charge, to go through them, damn them, go through them. The police took the arms and the private property of the men, their pocketbooks and money. Then, when my men were released from that prison, they demanded their property and money, which had been taken from them by the police, which demand was refused, and the fact of the authorities having the money flatly denied, and instead of receiving their property in accordance with their just demands, they received insulting and ungentlemanly answers. The property, as yet, has not been returned. The lieutenant colonel also says one of my officers gave his sidearms to his servant to keep for him. The servant buckled the belt around him and stepped just outside of the walls of Libby near the door or entrance, and at that he was assailed by the police of Richmond. So there you have the other side of the story. It's hard to know what the truth is. I did some searching around looking for other accounts, news accounts, diaries, letters, regimental histories, other writings. I came up empty. So I suspect somewhere out there is another account that might confirm or deny what I've just read to you. If you know what it is, if you find it, let me know. If not, you can ponder these two accounts and imagine which might be the right one. As in many research stories that I encounter, the truth often is somewhere in the middle. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.